Is Andover permanent?
No, for a year. Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 7th, 2019 meeting of the Hamilton Planning Board. I'm Brian Stein, the chair. We have a continued public hearing tonight for a medical marijuana facility, site plan review, and stormwater management permit at 654 Asbury Street. After that, we will be talking about our master planning, our residential forum recap regarding our housing portion of the master plan. We have to review and potentially sign a decision regarding an abbreviated stormwater management permit that we talked about last time. Meeting minutes, and then we will possibly be going into an executive session later on to discuss meeting minutes from quite some time ago, so we can comply with the open meeting law. So first up is 654 Asbury Street. Patrick, could you give us a quick rundown of where we are, or people that don't know where we're at?
Yeah, again, as Chairman Stein had mentioned, this is a site plan review. What is unique about this is that the planning board was also charged with overseeing compliance with what's known as a host community agreement that took place between the Board of Selectmen and the applicant. The applicant has done, as I understand it, an incredible level of permitting with the state already, but two of the very important elements of their permitting was to be in front of this board for site plan review and compliance with the elements that are made part of that host community agreement. So we're working through that tonight. It's my understanding we're going to be discussing traffic. That's been discussed some by the board so far. We've gotten a fair amount of data. I do want to make board members aware that I've contacted fire department, the police department, and DPW. They have no concerns regarding traffic concerns relative to site design or access to and from the property. So I worked them pretty hard to try to get something, but they simply had no negative comments. They felt like access to and from as being proposed from the property is appropriate and non-problematic. Some other things that we'll be discussing tonight, as I understand it, are site plan design, some utilities, maybe some water use as well. There's certainly a lot that will be addressed at a later date. I know that the applicant is working on smells, odor, as well as noise. That'll be to the board at another date. Also, I want to mention that our peer reviewer, Phil Paradis from the Beta Group, is with us tonight. He has prepared a number of products that I've been providing to the board over the last few weeks, so he'll be presenting some of his findings to us as well. What I do want to make the board aware of, and there has been an ongoing question regarding use for the medical marijuana facility. We did get a written opinion from Town Council Donna Brewer. You have it in your package. Let's see, that's the first item after number 1 in your package. The long and short of it is that she agrees effectively that it's a resident or a agricultural use and finds it acceptable. So I think it's important to point that out for the public and those in attendance as well. This board follows legal directives from town council because that's what we do. The same as town staff follow town council as well regarding legal matters. So It doesn't mean that we can't question it, but it does mean that we do follow it.
Thank you. Does anybody have, before we get into everything, I do want to talk about Donna's letter, if anybody has any questions or comments on it, as Patrick noted.
I have one comment, which is I think the issues she raises should be addressed by some tidying up of our bylaws. We should define agriculture, which we've never done, and we should say something about industrial use, which we don't say in the zoning. So we could stand at the next town meeting to tighten up some of that wording.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I'd like to make a comment too. I think the big confusion is that people don't realize that agriculture has been industrialized, and they don't understand that it's still agriculture. Agriculture means that you're growing something for food or some other use, and that's exactly what's happening, and it's a growth. That people go into an industrial complex and do marijuana growing is simply because they may not have the open space that the Patton family has to do the agriculture, but it's still agriculture in an industrialized way, and therefore it crosses over the line, and people have to realize that it is absolutely agriculture.
Anything else?
I agree with Bill in that I think that we need to work on the bylaws.
Just to make it clear. Yeah, agreed. So Patrick had suggested that we essentially vote on whether or not we want to accept this opinion and move forward from there, which I think is a good idea. Just so I just want to make sure we dot all the i's and cross all the t's as we move forward here. So
I make a motion that we accept the opinion of town council that the medical marijuana facility is allowed.
is there a second?
Isn't allowed agricultural use.
Is an agricultural, well, she actually says 2 points. She says if you think of it as agriculture, it's allowed. And if you think of it as industrial, we don't prohibit industrial. So either way,
Right.
it's allowed.
Is there a second? Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Okay. I don't know who was planning on presenting first, if it was Kevin or... Yeah, please.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Bob Patton, CEO of Green Meadows Farm. Again, always thanking the board here for allowing us to present. I do want to interject one thing. I know you all received a letter from Attorney Ben Timon, representing the Abbots of Topsfield, about our matter, and I thank Attorney Timon for the courtesy of CCing me that, and I appreciate it. I don't have a written response or anything, but I do want to say that the point that he brought up in the subject of that letter was water use is extremely important and is worth bringing up, and in that sense, a letter like that makes us better. But I would ask some recognition that we are in a process here of we're very proud of the conservation measures, the sustainability measures that we're putting in, recapturing roof water, condensate, recirculating our fertigate, and the $3 million number that was presented as our use of water, we're going to be way below that. But nevertheless, that's something we have to prove, and through the peer review and to you all, that we intend to do so, and also working very much, and we've already started the conversations, and they'll no doubt get more in depth with the Ipswich River group. So I just wanted to say that's a super important point, as our odor and all the other things we've talked about. It's not lost on us, but there's more to the tale that we look forward to presenting. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Patrick, have we got a date for Wayne to come?
Actually, Kristen Grubbs is here tonight.
Oh, all right.
As Wayne had mentioned to me, he deals with 21 cities and towns in the Ipswich River watershed and is fairly taxed. He is lucky enough to be assisted by Kristen, so she's here tonight. I have been sending them the paperwork that we've been provided with by the applicant, as well as our peer reviews as well. So I'll continue with that.
Thank you so much.
I would like to make sure that when we do discuss water, at some future hearing, we have careful calculations of net water use as opposed to gross. That's very important for the Ipswich River estuary.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure I have the opportunity tonight at some point to speak to a couple points in my letter, but
Can you just
should I do that after the engineer's presentation?
Yeah, let's get through that, and then we'll make sure you're heard. Nope, no worries.
Good evening. Again, for the record, my name is Kevin McGarry. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I am a project manager at Fuss & O'Neill. Before I get into what I was going to say, we are working on preparing a water impact statement that's everything you guys just said, water usage, comparing to historic data. It's going to have all of that in there. I've spoken with Wayne a couple times, and once we've prepared this document, we're happy to meet with Ipswich River Watershed and walk them through that whole thing. I don't have those numbers tonight, so I mean, we can talk about it big picture, but I wasn't really planning on getting into water usage in that much detail this evening. Since the last hearing, we did submit to Beta responses on traffic. We did receive site plan, stormwater, and utility comment letters from Beta. We have not submitted a formal response for that yet. However, we've been working on it since we've got it. I've spoken with Phil about a couple questions that I had just to clarify a few things. Fuss & O'Neill doesn't really see any issues. We expect to fully be able to address all the comments that were brought up. The design teams also met with the police chief to review the security plan, and he gave us, had a couple requests. We went back and met with our security consultant and have since submitted revised information back to the police chief, so we look forward to getting a letter of support from him regarding security. What I passed out to you is, in working with Patrick, we tried to develop sort of a checklist, if you will, of the items, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, just to try to help the design team and the board sort of stay on track, if you will, with what are the items that have to be addressed and talked about. It's done in order based on zoning bylaw and then by HCA. There are a couple repeats in there. I think like site plans are mentioned 3 different times. Obviously, we only have one set of site plans. I'm going to go through sort of that list with the board. Now I think there are a few items that we hope that we've provided enough information on. Upcoming in the next 2 weeks, we anticipate responding to Beta's site plan, stormwater, and utility comments. In addition to the water usage that I mentioned, we'll also be submitting more information on odor control, noise, our organic chemical use and storage plan, and then a waste management plan, which is, again, one of the specific requirements in the HCA. And as I mentioned, we do hope to meet with Ipswich River if they would like to have us. In terms of the tracking list, what I was going to do is I was going to go through each item. I know it's a little repetitive, but I've just found the best way is we'll go down the list, sort of talk about what each item is and where in our submission you're going to find that information. And then I'll circle back on, again, permitting plans will get mentioned a few times. I'll circle back afterwards and we'll sort of take the items one at a time. So the first item on our list was principal use. I feel that I don't really have to talk about that anymore because you guys just discussed that. The second item was the project plans, which again, erosion sediment controls, grading, utilities. And we feel that that's all covered by Beta's peer review letter. So once we have addressed Beta's comments, and we hope to get a favorable letter back from Beta, that we've addressed our comments. If the board has any other questions, we can answer those. Traffic, we submitted a response, excuse me, a response to Beta, and we've gotten a letter back. Air quality, which is something that was in your zoning bylaw, that will be addressed as part of an odor control plan, so that's why that item is bolded and italic on the list, because it has yet to be submitted. Surface and groundwater quality and drainage conditions are all in the stormwater management plan. Again, we have that peer review letter from Beta. Site plans get mentioned again. And now we're into the HCA items. So again, the first one was site plans. Security measures, again, we're hoping to get a favorable letter from the chief. 9, 10, and 11, the fire suppression emergency access staffing plans. I'll talk about those in a little bit. Item 12, coming at this is still in the HCA, is vegetation buffers, maintenance, and pest controls. A lot of that information is on the site plans. Item number 13, odor management. Again, we'll have our odor control plan. Item 14 was the integration of the building into the site and a historic landscape, as well as some discussion about lead and energy efficiency. A lot of that information is in the site plans. The mitigation of light pollution, again, it's in the plans. We have the photometric plan. We'll be submitting a revised one as part of our submission. The delivery schedule was talked about in traffic. Waste management, that's another of the additional reports we plan on submitting. Construction impacts, a lot of that information is shown on the plans. I'm going to get into a little more detail on that. Chemical use, or chemical storage and use, again, we're going to be submitting a revised list of organic chemicals. The water supply and waste plan, again, and water impact statement. I think for the third time now, odor has been mentioned. We will be submitting more information on odor control. Noise, we'll be submitting a noise impact statement. And the final item is the water impact study. Again, we'll be submitting a water impact study. And again, if the board feels that we've missed an item, or Patrick, you go through it and you feel we've missed an item, please let us know and we'll make sure we get it added to the list. So again, what that all kind of boils down to is like traffic, project plans, stormwater, emergency and building operations, and then the 5 supplemental reports that we're going to receive. So from a traffic standpoint, we submitted a revised traffic letter. We incorporated all the supplemental information that we had given to Beta. We addressed all their comments. We got a letter back from Jeff stating that we've addressed all his comments. I mean, if the board has any further questions, we're happy to answer, but at this time, we've given all the information that we can, and we believe that we've provided enough on that item. I don't know if you want to take these one at a time, or do you want me to go down my whole list?
I think if we have questions as you get into each item, then we can
Sure.
answer those as we go. But
All right. So again, the project plans, the site plans, the screening, the lighting, we'll be resubmitting a lot of that information. The integration of the building and site into the historic landscape, which is item number 14 on the list that I provided. We gave colored renderings of what the building would look like at the last meeting. We've talked at a high level about all the energy efficiency impact design features that we've incorporated. I don't know if the board has any more specific questions related to that particular item.
I don't think so.
Okay. Construction impacts, which is item 18. We show erosion and sediment controls on the site plans again. So we'll have silt fence, catch basin inserts, stone check dams, construction entrance, dust control, sweeping along Asbury Street. There's not going to be any parking or equipment located on Asbury Street. That site has plenty of room that construction employees, deliveries will be able to turn into the site and get off of Asbury Street. Again, I don't know if the board has any more specific questions on that particular issue related to construction. If you do.
Yeah, other than maybe just an overall construction schedule, timing. I mean, I know maybe the start date might be in flux, obviously, but just overall duration, maybe.
We're looking at like 9
months.
9 months. So we're looking at approximately a 9-month construction schedule.
You can provide a detailed one if you'd like.
Stormwater management, again, we'll be resubmitting all those calculations back to Beta. So then moving into sort of the emergency response and security items, as I mentioned, we've met with the police chief, so assuming we get a favorable letter back from him, we feel that we'll have addressed all the security concerns. Don't know if the board has any more questions. In terms of emergency access, fire suppression, we did actually submit some documentation to the fire chief about fire suppression for the facility, which I did, Patrick, I sent that to you earlier today. In essence, the non-growing areas of the building will be sprinklered, and there's a 2-hour firewall that separates the growing spaces from the non-growing spaces. Fire chief agreed with that approach. We've done the calculations. There's enough flow for fire flow at the site from when we did a hydrant test. If the board has any other questions, we're happy to answer. As Patrick mentioned, he's reached out to police and fire. We met with police and fire to discuss at a high level in addition to the design team's follow-up meetings with the police chief. The fire chief at that time had requested an additional hydrant, which we added, but at this time, we feel that we've addressed any concerns that he has in terms of emergency access. In terms of emergency plans and staff contacts for emergency, Green Meadows will be providing that once they have staff. So I don't know how we can really provide that at this time, but they will be able to provide that. From the building operations side of things, again, a staffing plan, the manager, and that kind of those items, again, will be provided once they have that. The delivery schedule, that was sort of in the traffic review letter. We talked about deliveries. Again, if the board has any more questions, we're happy to answer. And as I mentioned, forthcoming will be 5 supplemental items: water impact, odor, noise, waste manage, and organic chemical storage and use plan.
Question.
Yes,
When do you see those supplemental reports?
in the next week or two.
Oh, okay.
We've been taking our time to make sure that they're right and evaluating additional options, see if there's, we understand how sensitive the town is to water and noise and odor, so we're making sure as a design team that we've evaluated all the options that we can to mitigate all those measures. Yes?
Since I'm new to the board, I haven't had an opportunity to chime in on this. The site plans that I have seen in terms of screening the facility from either direction on Asbury Street are not adequate. That I personally would want to see as little of this building as possible going either direction on Asbury Street. And what I saw in the original plans, some trees in the front around the parking lot, would not accomplish that objective.
So
Okay.
you were not at the first hearing.
I was not at the first hearing. I saw the plan as presented.
Right. So we did do some renderings, which I could pull up and
Right.
show you as well.
The ones that were in the plan, to me, looked in not sufficient. You wanna-
I think the ones that we saw at the first meeting were much more extensive.
Much
than
more
the ones the
extensive than
last one.
are in the plans?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I resolve this
It-
right now?
I have all the stuff on my computer, I just wasn't sure if we were gonna need it, so I'm happy to pull it up on the screen.
Well, he's looking at that.
Sure.
You mentioned, are you going for a LEED certification?
No.
Okay.
LEED was mentioned in the HCA, which is the reason that I
Oh, okay.
repeated it. We have implemented, and we've talked about it, all sorts of, energy efficiency in the building.
Going for a what, Rick, did you say?
LEED certification.
Would-
It's a measure of energy efficiency. It's an internationally recognized standards of meeting various, well, I don't know, steps of energy efficiency.
Okay, thank you.
This is much clearer than anything in the plans, but I still would like to see a lot more screening.
Okay.
I mean, I think you gotta be a little careful in terms of how much you plant along there so it doesn't look completely unnatural and look like this wall of screening, right? Sometimes that can be
Yes, the
not worse.
row of arborvitae hedge
Well,
looks a little artificial, sure.
Right, so,
The other problem is that we can't condition it to the extent that it becomes excessive cost
well,
to
right,
the owner.
right. And, I think, the renderings you put in, some trees, obviously for screening that are more, I don't know if they're more the size that they would be when they're put in roughly, or I don't know how that
Yeah,
was.
I don't,
But-
I can't commit to
Yeah.
because then I get held to that.
Yeah.
But that should be something that you would see in the first couple of years. Whether it's the exact of when they get put in or after they.
Smaller plantings, 6 feet high around the facility, something to.
So that was actually one of the comments in Beta's letter about providing some additional screening up against the building. They had, I believe,
Dark, right.
had requested some screening along the front, which actually, now that you're bringing it up, we will put screening wherever the board feels it's necessary. The front facade of that building does have a different treatment on it to make it look like it fits more in with the natural area. Bear with me while I find the letter. Sorry. Yeah, so Beta recommended adding some screening along the facade that faces Asbury Street with the center door. Some additional low screening along the south elevation, which would be, if you're looking at the plan, on the left. Some screening for their drainage basins. And that was their recommendation.
Low stuff, 4, 5, 6 feet tall, something like that.
You're more concerned along the building?
Yeah, between the planted trees you have and the building, or along the building.
Can absolutely look into that.
Well, at some point, you would provide a schedule of plantings.
Yeah, there is a schedule of proposed plantings in the, there's a planting plan.
Right, but does that reflect Beta's comments?
No, that's what they commented on.
Right.
So we will,
So what I'm saying is you will provide an updated.
Correct, yeah. So when we respond to Beta's comments, we will include some additional plantings.
Any other questions from the board?
I had a resident ask me yesterday to make sure to pose the question to you whether or not any of the stone wall was being modified at all.
So we'll be modifying small amount of the stone wall near our entrance to accommodate the wider driveway that was requested by the fire chief. That will be it.
Because we do have a scenic roadway bylaw, we're going to have to hold a special hearing on that. So just let me know ahead of time so we can do that. I'm sure you'll have a sketch as to exactly what effect you'll have, what you're removing, and what you might be modifying. So that'll be helpful to have that in advance.
Sure.
Anything else? Great. Yeah, you can go, then we'll let Phil go. Okay.
Just before I said, so as I go down that list again, can I just give you the items that, again, we feel that we've provided enough information on, so if you don't have it, we'd like to know so we can get it for you. That would be number 3, number 9, 10, and 11, 16, and 18. And 1, obviously, which we already talked about. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ben Timon, counsel for Chris Abbott, 123 Asbury Street in Topsfield. Just wanted to comment on a few things. First, with regard to Town Council Brewer's letter. Her conclusion isn't really a surprise to me. You may recall that I was here in the fall making a presentation to the board, trying to persuade the board to put a medical marijuana overlay bylaw in place because medical marijuana dispensaries or cultivation facilities are allowable uses anywhere in town. So it's not a question of whether it's allowable in the agricultural residential district, it's whether it should be there. And so this board is obviously going through a site plan review process, which, as you all know, and I know well as a land use lawyer, is an as-of-right use, but comes subject with the conditioning process that you're going through, and includes language in your bylaw that I think
may end up becoming applicable in this hearing that says if there are no set of conditions that can adequately address impacts, then it can be denied. And so when you get to issues of water use and other things, at the end of the hearing, the board may determine that there are no such conditions that can address some of these issues. But it's no different than any other site plan review process, and I don't disagree with Attorney Brewer's conclusion at all that it's that it isn't prohibited. It's just a matter of should it be in the zoning district. And I was looking at some of the meeting minutes from the meeting subsequent to the one that I presented at, and I saw that Mr. Clark, for example, I think had advocated for pursuing a medical marijuana overlay district at the annual town meeting, and maybe the town will do that at some point in the future. Obviously, it's a moot point now, although the ZBA, is as you know, holding a special permit proceeding, which is a different and higher standard than what this board is looking at in a site plan review process. I do want to make a comment as well with regard to the host community agreement. The host community agreement, as you may know, is a prerequisite for any state applicant. So I think it's important not to overstate the importance of the host community agreement. It's the ticket to the dance. Anybody who wants to apply for an approval with the state has to negotiate and receive a host community agreement from the municipality. And so, it by no means is an approval. It is the opening gambit to begin the state process, a process which, by the way, as I think the board knows, has nothing to do with any of the impact issues that this board is looking at, with a possible exception of security, which the state does, have strict rules about. But the state, DPH, now the Cannabis Control Commission, they don't look at water impact, they don't look at water quality, they don't look at traffic, they don't look at all of the issues that you're looking at. So Patrick Reffett is right that it's a strict approval process, but it's a totally separate set of issues than the ones that you and the ZBA are looking at. I'd also point out that the host community agreement has a couple of important sections. It has, for example, a reopener provision that gives this board and this Board of Selectmen the ability to reopen the host community agreement if the board finds that the impacts that emerge in this hearing are more significant and severe than those that were anticipated in the agreement itself. That's more than just the impact fee, which was 1.5% impact fee that the selectmen negotiated, even though 3% is the state maximum, and even though just about every other community that I'm aware of is at 3%. Hamilton was at 1.5%, and what they negotiated with the Pattons. So there is a reopener provision. The other provision, which I think is even more important for purposes of the board, is at section Roman numeral 4, subsection 1. The pages of the host community agreement aren't numbered, but it's section 4, subsection 1, letter of support or non-opposition. That's a letter that, again, is a prerequisite for state licensing application. But about halfway through that paragraph, it says, notwithstanding the above being the provision of the non-opposition letter, the town makes no representation or promise that it will act on any other license or permit request in any particular way other than by the town's normal and regular course of conduct and in accordance with their rules and regulations and any statutory guidelines governing them. In other words, the host community agreement is saying, this is the HCA, this is how the relationship will be governed if you get your approval. But of course, you have to go through the normal and regular process of planning board review, ZBA review in this case, because it's in the groundwater protection district. So I think the board knows well that this is by no means a rubber stamp procedure. This is a normal site plan review procedure, and the HCA does not give the applicant any special standing beyond a normal site plan review applicant. I did want to put into the planning board record the Hamilton Water Department water records that I referenced in my letter of May 6th. Patrick, maybe I could just give those to you. I have a copy for Mr. Patton as well. So just briefly for the public, because I know the letter went to each of the members, and I thank Patrick for always diligently distributing these by email to the members. So we did a public records request to the Hamilton Water Department to ask for the water use records of the largest private users of water in Hamilton, of town water, so that we could put into context the projected water use of the marijuana cultivation facility. Mr. McGarry at the first hearing said orally that the maximum daily water use would be 8,250 gallons per day. And I know he'll, I'm sure, hasten to add that that's maximum daily use according to him. They have not yet provided the calculation, so I would point out in contrast that fairly that should be taken as a conservative number until we see what the calculations are and the backup for that number. But at 8,250 a day, that's over 3 million gallons of water per year. And to put that in context, that would make this facility the third largest private user of water in Hamilton after Myopia and Gordon Conwell. That's according to the water department records that we've received. So it's an immense amount of water. The Ipswich River Watershed Association, who has a representative here this evening, has a net zero water use policy that they can speak more about, and they've written a letter to both boards about that. And so it's going to be extremely difficult for Green Meadows to make up that degree of water. The other information that we received in the data from the water department, we've asked for more data to back this up, but we did get some quarterly water usage data from 2017 during the last full quarter that Green Meadows Farm was operating as a conventional farm, and it used, just pull out the statistics here. This was April through June of 2017, so the second quarter of 2017. The farm, according to, again, town records, used 142,000 gallons of water in that quarter. So, of course, Green Meadows Farm never operated year-round, maybe used more water in the summer than in the spring, although that summer of 2017, I understand, is when they closed. But if you took a typical year, I think to be generous to Green Meadows, maybe they used 3 times that quarterly spring amount, which would be 426,000 gallons per year of water, which is 1/7 of the 3 million gallons that, by their numbers, for maximum daily use, they would be using. So again, they have said they're going to provide the calculations. When they do, we'll see if it's 2 million a year, 3 million a year, or what it is, but it's going to be a number that is an order of magnitude larger than the amount of water that was used when it was Green Meadows Farm. Furthermore, as my client, Mr. Abbott, pointed out, they're presently leasing a portion of their farm to Marini Farms, which is using water. And so they're not going to be able to get credit for a water savings in that regard. The rest of the letter speaks for itself, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board members may have.
Now, as you know, we'll get into water much more down the road, but I appreciate you bringing it up now. But thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Abbott.
Christopher Abbott. I'm not sure where this falls into the scheme of things, but in terms of traffic, I don't know, is it important that we compare it with the way it's been with Green Meadows, the amount of traffic?
It's one way.
Okay, well, keep in mind that roughly half the time, or at least 5 months a year, there was no activity at Green Meadows. I'm the only one in this room who actually knows the traffic pattern because we used to walk there to get vegetables. I pass by 6 times a day. Mondays it was closed, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, a car or two. Friday, busy. Saturday, certainly the weekends, much busier. And of course, if there was an event, you know, there was more. But there is a significant uptick in that facility with the amount of traffic. This is 365 days a year. There are going to be cars coming in and out of there. It's at least double. You know, I can't do the math on it, but just for perspective, there's going to be a lot more traffic to that facility. Not necessarily on Asbury Street, but to the facility. I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Please. Yep.
Hi, I'm Kristen Grubbs, environmental planner with the Ipswich River Watershed Association. I understand there'll be more opportunity to talk about water at a later date, but I just wanted to introduce myself. Thank you for asking questions. My colleague and boss, Wayne Castonguay, has had several conversations about this, and we're certainly interested to be available and be a resource to the town and to the board. I serve on my own planning board in Newbury, so I understand how complicated these projects can be, and I'm still learning a lot. So it's another opportunity to be with you tonight. And I guess since I'm here, I'll just mention, you know, a couple highlights from the letter that we've submitted, which you've all seen. And just to reiterate, our perspective as a watershed association is to think about water across the region. That's many towns. There are many towns and boards who are reviewing and exploring large-scale developments that use a lot of water. Not just industrial or agricultural uses, which is certainly a concern, but residential and also 40B developments. So our perspective is to, I guess, offer that perspective to the individual towns that the Ipswich River is an over-allocated watershed, which means the state has determined what the safe yield in terms of water withdrawals are. And we're there. No more new water can come out of the basin, which essentially means towns will need to live within their allowed usage of water. So when there are new projects that come forward, we like to try to offer our net zero policy for consideration, which is essentially let's allow for growth, but let's see if we can achieve water neutral growth. I sort of like that phrase better. It acknowledges that growth and development will continue to happen, and that's important for our communities, but we need to think about it as an overall balance. So we're working with lots of communities to talk about what tools are available. We're looking at what some of your neighboring towns, Danvers has what's called a water bank, a water use mitigation strategy. Ipswich is thinking about that. I think this is the conversation we're having as a region and watershed, and we really want to be a resource to towns. I think a couple of the points related to this specific project, we look forward to seeing the calculations that we've talked about. We certainly would recommend that the town have its own review done of those calculations. We hope that the project can strive 100% of its water use, strive to offset 100% of the water use. That may be challenging. Maybe we couldn't get there, but there are strategies that to really dive into and ask tough questions about. We hope the project minimizes the production of stormwater. You know, currently the conditions are all the water goes back into the ground, goes back into that important aquifer that does provide Hamilton's water. So let's think about infiltrating 100% of the stormwater on site. And then when you get down to, the site plan level and the planting plans and all of that, we certainly always recommend native species, drought tolerant species. We saw a really intense drought couple years ago around here. I know that affected all of us in different ways, but as much as we can keep the water in the ground and not use additional irrigation, we would offer that irrigation systems should be prohibited on this site. So those are, there's sort of the big picture down to the little picture, and I recognize the challenges of being a board, considering all of those extent of things. So we're here to be a resource. Wayne and I are certainly willing to meet, and we'll undoubtedly see you again at whatever date the water conversation happens. So
I have a question.
thank you.
Are you interfacing or communicating with the Board of Selectmen in Hamilton on water conservation strategies?
We have a municipal services program, so we have done general outreach to the boards and committees, including select boards. I certainly haven't met directly with the Board of Selectmen. I don't believe Wayne has in recent times, but we're always available and willing to do that. So if you have recommendations about where or when that might make sense, we'd be happy to.
Well, I'm just wondering how proactive you are in engaging with the leaders of local communities, as opposed to waiting for them to contact you. What are you guys doing to get to them and advocating water reduction usage?
Yep. Again, we have a municipal services program, which that's the goal of our program, is to reach out to communities. We've done that through sort of publication of our net zero water use policy. And again, we can always do more. But I thank you for that comment. And I think since your new town manager started, we've been having more direct conversations with him and with some of your new selectmen. So I hope that we continue to do that. Thank you.
I have a question too.
Yep.
Actually, it's two. Is it the Watershed Association that has set the net zero policy, or is it a state policy?
So Ipswich River Watershed has a net zero water use policy that we encourage communities in the watershed to also adopt or consider adopting.
How does that work with the problem of 40B housing? We're supposed to add 200 housing units of a 40B type, and that's obviously going to cost water. How does that fit with your net zero policy?
It's challenging.
To say the least. But I mean,
Isn't it true that most residential use puts back about 90% of what it takes out? Unless you have a sewage system, such as Beverly and Salem and Peabody do, that sends all that water out to the ocean, so it doesn't go back into the aquifer. And most houses in Hamilton have communal or individual septic systems, which means 90% goes back into the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we're looking at more closely now because of the challenge there, and I to your comment, I think the state and the governor's office are putting a lot of attention on housing and the importance of housing, particularly affordable housing. So we are seeing more 40Bs coming to different communities. So it's not easy. I think there's a lot of efficiencies we can meet in terms of new development, in terms of indoor water use, in terms of outdoor water use. There's a lot of room to conserve more. And towns have been doing more and more water conservation, and we have a big program around that. But I think, again, it's the balancing of it. So we hope that as our communities continue to grow, we can balance it with reducing water use in other ways and putting water use mitigation mechanisms. There's some good strategies about compensating in order to make that balance. Make it net zero at the end.
Thank you.
I'm not really sure of myself, but I think, Bob, at some point, you've talked about having to import some water. And how are you going to manage that? And have you been talking with the Ipswich Watershed about?
I'll let Kevin speak to that.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
So all these water impact issues are going to be spelled out in our water impact statement. But to answer your specific question, we do have two different things. We have a rainwater harvest system, which will lay out all the calculations for that. It's also been equipped with an external fill. So if there is a drought scenario and water resources sensitive issue, they can bring in water from an offsite source. But it'll all be laid out in that water impact statement. Once we've submitted that, we do hope to, I assume Beta would be the one to review that, Patrick?
Yes.
So,
But it would be drawn not from the Ipswich River Basin? The town?
The supplemental water.
if it comes from an offsite location,
Yeah.
correct, right. Obviously, if there's some sort of water ban in effect in the area, we wouldn't be able to get it from this area. It'd have to come from a different area.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'm very interested in how that's calculated and how it works, so I'm all ears.
And we'll go over that at a later time.
Thank you. Phil?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Patrick, thank you for choosing Beta to represent you guys and help you out with this. My name is Phil Paradis. I'm a professional engineer, a lead accredited professional, and a certified professional in stormwater quality. I think I have a lot of the easy ones today. It sounds like you guys got a lot of things to work on. I won't address water, noise, odor, the big three. But we did come to a conclusion relative to traffic. There was just one issue that I think that would help the situation, and is some advanced warning signs of the driveway. One is a little bit challenging in that it'll be in Topsfield. So I think we just got to figure out how to best handle that one. So relative to the site plan itself, I'm going to just address the general site plan. It's a pretty basic site plan. You've addressed the use already. The access drive is sufficient for the use. From what I understand, there's going to be a reduction in the loading area. I think there's just I think you just got to consider the parking as well. There's no specific guidelines in your zoning bylaws for that. From what I understand, the underground storage tank is no longer, so that takes care of that. You've already discussed our comments relative to landscaping. We'd like to add some we didn't even actually review the,
I can send that to you.
no, I think we have it, but now that it's come out, I know I didn't give it to my landscape architect, but he came up with these comments relative to what was on the plan. So we just want to make sure that those two relate. So we'll look at that again. Relative to lighting, the lighting is pretty standard. We just want to make sure that any building lights are included in the photometric plan in case they cause an impact. And also just are the lights going to be on all night? All the lights going to be on? Is it going to be just some security lights? We'd just like a schedule relative to how those may impact the abutters. Stormwater, relatively speaking, the attempt was to meet the stormwater management standards completely as a result of the project and the stormwater design. A few things we wanted the developer to considering you have this nice low-impact development handbook. We just wanted to make sure that there was, any kind of additional things that they can consider. Sounds like it may help them also with their water budget as well. And then we need some additional soil testing for the infiltration basins just to confirm soil texture as well as seasonal high groundwater. A lot of the other comments are, I want to say, just closing out the calculations. I don't, if you want to go into any specific ones individually, that'd be fine. But they are going to meet, there's no on-site wetlands, so that standard will not apply. Standard 2, they're going to not increase the peak rate of runoff. Standard 3, they're going to provide the required recharge. Sounds like they may be encouraged to recharge more. 4, the water quality treatment, once they've addressed the comments, they should meet that standard as well. 5 is land use subject to higher potential pollutant loads is not applicable. The critical area, it's kind of confusing where that lies because of the Zone 2 aquifer contribution zone that's mapped by DEP and then your own map. So, but I think they're going to provide the recharge and the treatment that would meet that standard anyway. 7, redevelopment. They're not using that category. 8 is erosion and sediment control. We have a number of comments that could enhance their plan, and I think once I've met them, they could do that. 9 would be the operation and maintenance plan, ongoing. Again, there's we just like to tighten up that plan and make it complete. And then illicit discharge detection, illicit discharge statement they provided. So relative to usage, to utilities, I think the question will leave the water question and whether the capacity and other issues are related to that. We've already talked about the tank. And there's a number of concrete pads in the back of the building that probably just need some clarification as to the usage. I understand one of them is the dumpsters and trash, things like that. And then there's yeah, so I think that's it. That's all I had. So it's my part of it, luckily, is pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward, but I think obviously we'll look at the water usage plan when it comes in and address any concerns there.
I have a question that I'm sort of ignorant. I don't know quite how the harvesting goes on, but is there a lot of compostable waste that comes from the harvesting, and will you be taking things to Brick Ann's farm? And
I hate to do this to you again.
yeah, I'm used to it.
We're going to submit a waste management plan that's going to get into all that level of detail.
Okay.
So we'll go over that once we submit it. We want to submit it first.
Okay.
And I forgot what I was going to say. When you
Well, they didn't know whether
But you're responding to their comments on the site plan and stormwater and so forth. So
Right, so that's correct. We've done the test pits. I need to send you that test pit information so you have it. We're going to we are going to address all of Beta's comments.
Great. Well, when you're talking about the agricultural waste that you might be taking to Brick Ann's, will it be the raw material itself, roots and so forth? Because I don't know whether we're going to have groupies running around following the truck and so forth.
That is by far the best question I've ever gotten at a planning board hearing. The cannabis-associated waste is not put in the dumpster. Mm-hmm. So the easiest way to think about it, you have normal garbage, normal recycling, that goes into a dumpster, just like it would at any other facility, gets hauled off by a third party. And then you have cannabis waste. That's kept inside the building. It's secured. There's specific state regulations in place of how to handle it, and it gets disposed of completely separately at a licensed off-site facility. But like I mentioned, our waste management will go into that. They have to keep records about it. We'll provide you all that information.
Okay.
There will not be, I'm sorry, how did you phrase it?
I don't remember.
great. Any other questions?
And then I did want to add to the list number, I missed number 14, I think. If you guys don't have any further questions on that, on my list, Patrick.
So, Patrick, you had suggested if we, are ready to vote on any specific topics such as traffic, since it's been semi-closed out potentially, that we kind of tick these off as we can versus waiting on everything till the end.
Yeah, I do recommend to the board that given the enormity of reviewable items as part of this project, that we basically finalize our evaluation review acceptance with an affirmative vote from the board, and then allow yourselves to go on to the remaining items. You'll recall when we did the Patton Ridge project, we did that approach. You'll recall when we've done other major projects, it's really helpful to allow us to keep on task. And the things that we've already reviewed, agreed to, we can sort of put them to bed.
Does anybody have further comments on traffic? Or are we ready to consider that?
So I make a motion that we accept the applicant's traffic mitigation strategies and plans.
Second.
Should we add that, is it
Sign.
as the latest revision, I think we should say.
As-
Not the originals, but the latest revision. Okay.
All right, that's inclusive.
Okay.
And subject to the addition of the advance warning signage
you wanted to comment
that's
on
been
that.
discussed.
I'm not sure we can do that since we don't have jurisdiction over Topsfield.
That's the only reason I need to go over that with you about what we need to do,
Right.
I will,
jurisdiction.
I'll offer to make best efforts to the town of Topsfield to suggest and work with my counterparts, DPW, roadway commissioners, et cetera.
Let's put speed bumps in.
All right, so we have a motion, it's been seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. All right. We need a motion to continue.
I make a motion that we continue the public hearing on a medical marijuana facility site plan review.
To
Second.
the 21st, right?
Is that the
Yep.
next?
To the 21st.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Thank you. Real quick, yeah?
Sleep. Fall right on my nose here. Oh, okay. Now that we've semi-closed the hearing, I guess, I just want to say something in regards to Mr. Clark's question. This is an interesting enterprise across the state, and if you can imagine every possible thing that we don't know about this, and certainly I didn't know, these kinds of questions about what happens if, what are these things, I think these are all really pertinent and really interesting, and sometimes they can be addressed in this forum and sometimes not. But if you could hear the things that in my mind, have come up with that I didn't know how this works, I think it's very pertinent to ask all the questions. I want the town of Hamilton and I want the board to understand what's happening in the building and outside. And so I understand that Kevin couldn't answer that kind of a question, but if you could hear the questions that I ask our team every other day, you would understand that when you asked that, I said, yeah, I've been there. I wonder what happens if things fall off the truck and whatnot. So I just had to say that on a personal note. So I'll sit down. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good, yeah. Thank you.
My wife is trying to increase the pickup of compostable material every week. And I think she's gonna have a hard time, but if we put cannabis in the mix, they might, selectmen might agree.
Does photosynthesis actually break apart water?
Jeez, we lost the whole audience.
You know, pure oxygen out of CO2, is there an extra? I remember enough chemistry. You strip apart the H2 and the O.
Wait till Patrick's back to talk about the
You have to get enough
What, yeah, what would it get back? Have you closed the,
I'm kind of,
she extended it
water that I take in.
for another week?
It was
5%
extended.
of it goes back into the ground.
I think it's closed again.
Did anyone?
667 more
May not be
Oh,
as-
really? Great,
not sure.
wonderful.
Did I hear you say you got 67 more?
67 more, yeah.
Amazing.
Surveys?
You did a good job.
Cool.
On the webpage,
Yeah,
on the survey.
on the Facebook
Facebook?
posts.
Thank you. But I only did it once.
Yeah, but you hit two Facebook pages, didn't
Three.
you? Three? Yeah.
I do the affordable housing, the Hamilton Wenham residence page, and the Hamilton Wenham community page.
Yeah.
The community page is the original one, and the residence-only page is similar and duplicative, but some people are on one and not the other, so.
I don't know which one am
Pardon?
I don't know which one am I.
One of them.
One of them,
One or two,
maybe.
yeah.
I never looked at Facebook.
Anybody want water?
Patrick, can you bring us up to date on housing forum recap and master plan, please?
All right. You'll recall Monday of last week, we had our second housing forum. We had, I think, probably about double the number of people that we had at the previous one. My probably inaccurate count was about 60 people, which I thought was really great. Very happy to have that level of involvement. We did revisit some of the decisions that people offered. I guess they were more suggestions that were offered in terms of locations where people thought that development was acceptable. And then we also discussed and determined, again, as a suggestion, what types of development we thought was most appropriate too in those locations. So each of the forum table groups went through that process. I think that we're going to be having, if this may in fact include everything that was part of that. We received it yesterday afternoon. I haven't had a chance to look through it, but I certainly will in the next couple of days. I'll also mention that they did reopen the survey, and 65, or I believe quite a number of additional folks have provided their input as part of that survey as well. So we have, I believe, a little over 600 people who've responded to the survey, which I think is really amazing.
Great.
Yeah, I was looking at this, trying to figure out, it said revised. I got a quick look at it. I don't see any different, but it may be here.
Yeah, well, this wasn't updated with the latest, the added 67, I don't think, was it?
No.
No.
Because it's still open, I assume.
I don't know if it's still open, but I'm just looking at the totals, like 550-ish in some of these.
Yeah, no, that
so-
was from the previous.
Right, it's from the previous one, right. Okay.
I know that during our discussion last week, we kept wrestling with trying to arrive at commonality of thought. And I didn't hear a lot of it. Maybe others did. I hope so. But I wasn't party to it. The group I was with were pretty much torn on everything. And I don't know if the other groups were that way, but the one I was participating in certainly was. I know that the consultants are working through all of the sets of recommendations to try to comb through and provide some commonality of thought so we can better understand what next steps ought to be.
Well, and exactly how are they going about that? Are they taking survey and parsing the forum data? I'm assuming there's some overlap, but that's really, I guess, the main way to do it, right? I mean, that's all they really have to go on.
My table that I was sitting at, and not that I was leading it in any way, but they definitely had a feeling that there's a lot of protected land, and there's not very much open space that's really available for new construction. And if we're talking about, as Judy had originally said, fairly large projects, no one's suggested to me where that might happen. Maybe some of you who have talked to Judy more often know of availability of land somewhere, but we noted on our piece of paper that we thought the town's starting to get built out.
Well, I mean, we know of at least 3 or 4 properties.
Three or four locations where.
Well, you're on the inside. And
No, these are all, it's all been talked about over the last few years, right? I mean,
Where?
Long Meadow, Essex Street,
Gordon
Tobacco,
Conwell.
Gordon Conwell, right? I mean, that's just a few. I mean, it used,
And you could add,
Rich before all that was subdivided, right? I mean, that's just 4 off the top of my head.
you could add the Rich property on,
Just mentioned that.
okay. Thanks.
Yeah, there's plenty of land.
Yeah, and yeah, some is protected, there's no question, but there's large estates
Right.
that don't have
Yeah.
protection over everything or a good.
Who's that older couple that wanted to sell their property to, I think they were on Essex Street?
Yeah,
way back?
Harbor Lights.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. right.
that property.
13 Essex, yeah.
No, I think what we're going to see is there's going to be, as there always has been, a dichotomy of, I think people are getting more sensitized to the need for different types of housing, for different sizes, different price points, but they also want open space. And it's kind of funny because this is going to circle back to where we started in the last master plan, which was preserving open space means doing something different, like what we tried to do with the open space and farmland protection bylaw, which was cluster housing, because we know single-family houses eat up a lot of land, and it's a waste of open space. Predicting that that's probably where we're going to cycle back to, is look at how can we work and try and make those two actually opposing points of view work. I mean, because
Right, and-
what I've seen, and I think I heard again was, well, people are going, what about the dump? What about Winthrop? Oh, God, there was another. Tobacco. Well, Winthrop's that's not going to happen in our lifetime. The dump was looked at 10, 12 years ago, and there's very little buildable land out there. Tobacco, that depends on whether somebody's going to sell that property or not. So we're sort of back to, okay, when land does come up, how do we incentivize this different type of housing? But that's just my takeaway from this.
Well, it comes back to the great estates. What happens if some of that land comes up, and how do you incentivize it being developed away?
Well, Mark has a plan for that, right? If they're in 61A, anyway. Any 61A property that comes up the town gets the first.
Right, but given, the town is unlikely to take any action on it, given what we saw with the Peary property. I think it's pretty clear that people in general, and especially abutters, would not be happy about that. You know, the town taking over and buying a piece of property and trying to develop it. I could be wrong.
Well, what Mark worked on was having the town exercise the right away, but he had back-to-back developer all ready to acquire the property and sort of pass it on very quickly.
Right. That would be the way to do it.
Yeah. You'd have to, right, you'd have to know what was coming, and
Yeah.
and then you'd have
Yeah,
to
'cause then you
have
have
the right
120 days, right?
the right zoning tools that somebody says, oh yeah, I can use. I mean, I believe we ought to revisit OSFPD and probably remake it so that it really works, so that the idea of cluster housing on a large, I think it's 10 acres or more, isn't it? I think that's was.
10.
Yeah.
You know, is actually viable, because now it's kind of like voluntary, and the incentives are.
Right, well, it was the selectmen that intervened, remember? They intervened and said, we don't want to make this a requirement that we always do cluster.
Right, right.
But
So-
maybe we'll reverse ourselves in the light of the housing need or demand or something.
Yeah, because one person tried to use that bylaw that I know of in the time it's been around, right?
Right.
And it was
Tom
Tom
Ford.
Ford, right? And he just said, you know, it'd be great to try to use it, but it's not flexible enough, there's not enough incentives, right? And remember, he wanted to potentially do, you know, different types of uses or housing on one site, and it
Right,
didn't really
we
allow
wanted
for that.
single-family homes.
Right, and some
then
cluster.
And I think that's something that to be looked at, is like, hey, you know, rather than,
Was that the Esdale estate or a different one?
Yeah.
that was the Esdale estate.
Yeah.
Which has its own peculiar restrictions.
And that's a good question to ask in the follow-up conversation we were talking about that before the meeting, is what are we going to get in the end from the group? Are we going to get any recommendations from them on, well, given what we've heard and seen, this is sort of a 5,000-foot level of where we think you need to be going? And I can't answer that question because I don't know.
I'm of the opinion our scope directed them
Yeah.
to provide that.
Okay.
So in my opinion, they haven't finished their project unless they have.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure we're clear, that they're clear.
And, you know, this brings up another point. We're supposed to have a telephone conversation with some of them in the next few days. You know, and that's one of the questions we need to hammer home and get some understanding. And I really want to see some tangible, workable kinds of recommendations. I know I have a set in my head that I carry around, and I'm sure other board members here do as well.
My thing, I think several people mentioned that this firm doesn't deal with trade-offs. It's always, are you in favor of something? The answer is, well, yeah, lots of people are in favor of things. The question is, are you in favor of it if it means less open space, if it means higher taxes, if it means, and there's just no sense here at all that those questions sort of addressed that the whole way the question was asked. You don't want to, there should be some kind of question where you ask people, you know, if you have to trade off this for that, which would you rather do? Go in this direction or go in that direction? And, because there are trade-offs. And they're just asking people, you know, what's important to you. Doesn't cut it.
To a point, you're right. Yeah,
Exactly right.
I mean, there's some questions that I don't think you have to have the trade-off as part of, but others you do, right?
And if you figure out what is important to people, you can then look at a development and go through those values and see what does it optimize out of those values, which ones are optimized.
And I think for the most part, if people have a strong opinion about what they want, in some sense, they have got to have gone through some of the trade-offs in their own mind. And we were asking for the conclusion, which is, what do you want?
I mean, it's
So,
interesting
they've
though,
already
like,
done the
I
trade-off
don't-
part.
I don't always agree, I don't totally agree with that
either.
because, you know, just from the 60 whatever responses we got back from the survey recently, you know, some of the conclusions were, or some of people's observations were, you know, we love the open space here, but, you know, we might move due to the high taxes, right? It was something like that, right? Well,
Yeah.
those two go very hand in hand, right?
Well, and
More open space you have, the higher your taxes are gonna be, on a rough basis, right? So that's the trade-off that you were just talking about, right? I mean, that's one of them.
But
So-
I don't,
But people don't get that always.
Why is that true?
Why is it true?
If you have open space, your taxes are higher. Well, if you buy the open space, I guess
no.
that's true.
No,
But if
necessarily.
you, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Because the value of open space, the value of non-open space has some kind of a building or use other than just being open space. So it
Well, and-
intrinsically has a higher value.
Right, and
It
And
doesn't
pay higher
return enough
taxes.
to the town to
But it
cover
also
its costs.
uses services.
Right.
The
Open
thing we
space doesn't
learned
use
from
any
the-
services.
That's a
From
trade-off.
Judy anyway, was that you
Space
have to
doesn't
build.
use any
Wait a minute, we got
services.
two
doesn't
conversations
necessarily
going on
people
here.
going
I
in.
know, let's shut up.
I mean, I think in general that follows. I mean, maybe not every case, but there's a lot of open space here that's at least partially off the tax rolls. There's, you know, obviously a large piece of land with a nice house. They're, you know, they pay a decent sized tax bill if it's not under restriction, but, you know, it wouldn't be as much as if it was somewhat developed, right? So
I do
think you can make a statement.
I do agree with Bill, though, is people abstractly can say,
Yeah.
you know, I want this, or I want that. And you might like to think that they've actually done an analysis of trade-offs, but they haven't. And it isn't until you put them in a box and say, well, you know, you want open space, which, and if you take it to the extreme, is restrictive of new development. So it means that you've got a stagnant tax base. Are you willing to carry the higher costs of living in this town?
Right.
So those, however that kind of question is, then it's like they actually have to make a decision. So it would be actually useful, and I don't know if we could do it on our own or whether we did it at a later date, is to take all this data and then have it bring people back together again and do that kind of trade-off and just say, okay, here's what you've told us. You know, you want an increase, let's say, diverse housing stock, including affordable, I don't know whether this is affordable or accessible housing of different types and housing styles, you know. So would you go for 3 units an acre, 4 units an acre, you know? And again, the ideal would be if you could run some scenarios that said, okay, if you had a 20-unit development of cluster housing, and you could do some sort of financial analysis versus another approach, single-family homes or something. So
Isn't that what Judy was supposed to do?
yeah, and that's going to be the rub, because they ran some generic scenarios based on some early input, and
well, what they thought was, I won't say relevant, but what they thought was not even majority input, but there were some comments at the first forum that they kind of took and just,
that's what they then used for some financial analysis of very large projects, which
Yeah.
isn't obviously what has come out of the survey or, what we saw on the forums. It was talked about because, it was brought up by them, and it was those are some of the scenarios they asked us to look at, but it certainly wasn't in the survey at all. I mean, it was very bottom of the list, those large developments. So our thing was, why can't you go back and actually do what the survey has suggested in financial analysis on the top couple of
Scenarios.
options?
Yeah.
So we're still.
I do think there's a
Working through that.
disconnect in the general public, though, between what the boards are looking for and what the public is looking for compared to the financial impact of it. I don't really think they understand at all what financial results happen from the different types of housing, nor the income versus affordable housing impact. There's a huge misunderstanding about affordable versus low income.
Right.
Huge.
The use of the adjective affordable means very different things. So
Right.
some people understand it's 40B. To a lot of other people, it's just housing that's, affordable.
Well, it's
Small, modest, cheap, whatever you want to say.
Well, and I think it was, affordable is defined up to, 80% of AMI, which is an
Yeah.
income of 89,000 for a family of four. Well, that's teachers, firefighters, policemen, most of your craftspeople and service people. So, that's affordable at the top end. But when people think affordable, they think is drugs, guns, and, immigrants running wild in the streets and, terrorizing their neighborhoods. I mean, that's the image they
Well, there are
have.
different 40B programs,
There are.
right?
Oh, yeah, there are.
There are programs where you can get people running in the streets with guns, and then homeless people, and then there are programs for your friendly neighborhood firefighter. There's
Right.
different programs.
Absolutely. So but those are subtleties that are very difficult to get across to an uneducated, biased public that when it hears affordable housing, thinks the lowest common denominator. So that's the challenge is, because as you saw, if you were at town meeting a couple of years ago, we were talking cottage housing. Cottage housing that we're, in is it Lexington?
Riverwalk.
Riverwalk,
Concord.
those are $700,000 units. Well, people at town meeting will go, oh, I don't want that in my town. Those people are gonna come from the outside and they're gonna ruin the town.
Going to be
There
homeless.
was no differentiation as to what that meant. It was like a mob mentality, like, change? Oh, no, it's going to ruin our town. So
But
that,
you have to remember, a $700,000 cottage house, right? It's going to pay, $1,100, $1,200, $12,000 in taxes. The average cost of a student in the school system is $18,500. The marginal cost, the school board went through a very careful calculation to estimate what the true marginal cost was. That's just about half, so it's like 9.5.
It's not that.
So,
well, these are.
you build some of those houses and
They're-
one kid all of a sudden it's a net fiscal deficit.
But
Yeah,
you
but-
you can't look
No,
at it,
that's-
you cannot
that's
look
not
at it that way.
accurate.
You can't
That's
look
not
at it that
accurate.
way at all. I know you have, and I disagree with you every time, but it's wrong. You can't look at it that way.
Why can't?
Why not?
You have
Because you can't,
classrooms that are.
because adding one kid to a class doesn't increase the
No.
costs.
That's
right.
the marginal cost, it depends on whether you use average or
That
marginal.
is not a marginal cost.
No.
So.
Marginal cost is,
And-
the
Anyway.
school board actually, that's the actual cost.
Anyway, that's a very important discussion to have, to bring in, the information, objective information, because people, you see stuff on Facebook we know that the population of the school system over the last 5 years has decreased by 15%.
Yeah.
So adding kids right at this point in time is not going to add any cost to the system other than food.
Right, it's actually costing us more to
Right.
educate less kids than it is to educate
Right.
more kids.
Well, and you worry about the quality
And so,
going
what,
down.
I understand it, but the other thing is, when they did the junction development, the argument was made over and over again that these were going to be attached townhouses with 2 or 3 bedrooms, and there was going to be no kids in the school. But guess what? When you have houses like that for $650, which is what they were selling,
they're 3 bedrooms,
selling for, everybody who bought one had a kid. The place is flooded with.
Guess what?
That's great. I mean, I love children.
But I get it.
But the point is, the fiscal impact was disastrous.
I
But it
get it.
wasn't, though. How was it? Have you done the analysis on how it affected the schools? No. So how can you say that? You
Well,
can't just throw that
the
out
other-
there.
The other thing,
You
the other
believe in
thing,
zero marginal cost.
Bill, the other thing that you're kind of missing here is when they build a single-family, 4 or 5 bedroom, single-family home, they're bringing in 3 and 4 kids. That house is not carrying 3 or 4 kids in the school system. So,
No, carry, oh my God. Carry
So-
3 or 4 kids, you have to have a
so,
true mansion.
so, no, my neighborhood is full of them.
Yeah.
So
Mine too.
I'm watching my entire neighborhood turn over, and these are, $800,000-$900,000 homes, and there are 3 and 4 kids in them. So those houses are not carrying their true cost to the town. So we could argue, we really ought to be building 1 and maybe 2-bedroom homes, so, and that's what the cottage housing is. It's really 1,200 square feet. It's 1 and 2 bedrooms, so you might be bringing in 1 student. So I would argue that that's actually more cost-effective than building a large McMansion with, potentially 4 or 5 students, new students coming in, and 4 or 5, 4 bathrooms. So, there's all sorts of, but these are all good questions to ask and have some concrete information on, because, everybody has their opinion. Now, as I was beginning to say, Facebook, I said, that we know the school population has dropped 15% over the last 5 years. And on Facebook, I was hearing, oh, well, I see kindergarten is packed with kids. The school population is increasing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that becomes the general, the observation, the general thought pattern. We're in a bulge.
So the question is, was the kindergarten packed with kids because, was it 1 class? And because they had to go down from 1.5 to 2 classes?
So you take, like, my kid's class, right? So their kindergarten, first grade class had to have 3 classes because it was so large at Cutler, right? However, the classes at Winthrop were actually pretty small that year.
Yeah.
I don't know why they balanced them out that way, but they were. And it happened again recently. The first grade class is pretty big at Cutler, but right. So in Wenham, as we know, has been gaining kids, right? Their taxes have shot through the roof because they've been gaining more kids in comparison to us, right? So their percentage of the school
Cost, right.
cost has gone up, ours has gone down.
Yes, thankfully.
Well, I'm glad to pay my property taxes. I have no children in the schools, but I'm glad to pay them for my neighbor's kids.
So
Go to school.
And I agree.
I think the bigger
Because my
question-
kids got the same benefit.
Yeah.
I think the bigger question we need to answer, and hopefully the survey, we can parse it from there. I mean, you can. It's what kind of people do we want here?
Right.
That's what it really comes down to. It's not so much exactly the housing types, but you got to start with
Well-
who do we want?
Well, and that's why I say, I like having kids in my neighborhood. They run across my lawn, and I'm happy to have them do that.
Right. I mean, it's not just one group. It's numerous groups of people that we want. I think, but I think that's the bigger question we have to start with.
But it is kind of disappointing to hear, like, the people at my table, their ex-daughter-in-law would have to move out of town because she was renting in town, and she's a teacher in the school. Fortunately, they're in a position that they can buy a house for her and rent it to her.
Right.
But there's a program for that, and the problem is, Harbor Light doesn't deal with that program. Harbor Light, as I understand it, I'm a former student who works there, she's the number 2 person, they have a very narrow set of options that they want to pursue. And
Well, what's going up at, proposed to go up at Gordon Conwell is 60 to 80% of AMI. So that's a whole different population.
that was, I think, going to be ownership.
It is.
You have a program where you sort of
Exactly.
get a little subsidy and they allow you to own it. So that was going to be market rate housing and then 10 units of affordable owner
Right,
All the-
all owned, right. No, we know we need rentals. I mean, we've been talking about that since I've been in town. We need rentals.
But I think your rental situation is so limited for the fact that the town doesn't have much septic capacity left in the areas that need to be developed. And you can't put in the kind of rentals that make sense without a sewage system.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you can't put in a large enough.
Right. To make it work for the, I mean, 20 units is the minimum probably for a rental type situation.
Well, and, the whole apartments on your house or, at your house, we worked on that a little while back. I mean, encouraging those, where you can. But, yeah, I mean, there's a whole slew of stuff, but we're not gonna solve it tonight. So we'll have the call with them in the next few days, hopefully, really push them to, come up with their conclusions, their suggestions, I guess, potential bylaw changes. And then I want to have some kind of financial impact analysis on that, on a couple of those scenarios.
Could you ask Judy to lead a public meeting in which we give her a whole bunch of questions of what if, and what if, and what is the kind of impact on fiscal, and, because she wrote the master plan, and the most quoted thing is that you have to have a house of $1.2 million in order to break even and meet the needs. Now, she could investigate that again, because it's been 15 years since we wrote the plan. But I don't think it's gone down. Our tax rate's gone down just a little bit since then, but we could find out whether she thinks it's possible to find kinds of projects that we would be able to recover the costs of in terms of roads and schools and all the other things that the town has to have.
Right, we just need a couple of conclusion, or a couple of recommendations, right, for her to do that, based on the information that we have. I don't think we need to get more information to her. I think we've got, lots of survey responses. We've had 2 forums. We have to use that. I mean, I don't think she's going to do a public meeting.
Right.
Another one where
You can't do that at a public meeting.
Right.
If you had 2 or 3 scenarios, you could present those at a public meeting, and
That's what I thought you were gonna do. Cut it down to simple scenarios, but not the grandiose ones that she turned in the paper about.
that's where we're headed.
Right, that's where we're headed, right.
I hope.
I do too.
Well, if we're not, then we have to be. That's what this whole thing was about. If we're not, then the whole thing was useless. Or pretty useless.
Well, plus, have we signed a contract with them for the update of the housing production?
We have.
Well, that can always be discussed as a lever.
Yep.
So shall we move on?
Yep. So we need to review this decision from last meeting about the stormwater?
I have written it up. It is ready for signatures. I've sent it out to each of the members, so.
How many signatures?
At least 5. This was the decision for 47 Winthrop Street. And it was the abbreviated storm management plan.
That's Susanna Colorado's.
Yes.
So we've got minutes from the April 2nd and April 23rd meetings. Anybody have comments on those?
Oh, that's yours. Started to grab it on you.
I move approval of the April 2nd minutes.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve the April 23rd, 2019 minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, aye. Opposed? Okay.
Yes.
Now,
Page number 2. Okay.
are there any updates for anyone before we vote to potentially go into executive session? So I'm thinking we're not going to come out, or that we're not going to reopen the hearing, come back into a closed
Correct.
session, so.
Yeah, I see no reason for it unless you folks do.
Okay. So I will request a motion that the board vote to convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing meeting minutes related to ongoing litigation, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the board.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor to go into executive session?
Aye.
No, we have to do
We
it.
have to do roll call.
Yeah.
Yep, Richard?
Okay. Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
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 Peter? Brian? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Unanimous.
Okay. This,
Is there anybody here? Oh, he has to turn off the,
yeah. Let me hand out